A domestic worker is berated by her employers for making the soup too salty the next day. While cleaning the house, she discovered a winning lottery ticket and hid it. When the boss found out it was missing, chaos ensued. The aroma of the freshly prepared soup filled the kitchen at the Rosales mansion. Maria, a 25-year-old with dreams larger than her apron, carefully prepared the dish. Her hands, rough from hard labor, trembled slightly as she served the soup in fine china. Mrs. Rosales, a 38-year-old whose external beauty contrasted with her bitter heart, took the first spoonful, contorting her face in disgust. "This is inedible," she shouted, throwing the spoon at the plate. "Are you trying to poison us with so much salt?" Maria felt slapped, years of humiliation crystallizing in that moment, and a spark of defiance ignited in her eyes. Mr. Rosales, a businessman more concerned with his investments than family peace, tried to calm the situation with a weak, "It's not that bad, dear," but the damage was done. Mrs. Rosales continued her tirade, listing every imagined flaw in Maria's work. Each word was a lash that left invisible scars on the young worker's soul. As she cleared the dishes with trembling hands and a heart pounding with anger and helplessness, Maria overheard a tense whispered conversation between the Rosales about debts, gambling, and businesses on the brink of collapse. The illusion of a perfect family shattered before her eyes. That night, alone in her tiny room, Maria cried, not just for the humiliation, but for the revelation that her oppressors were as vulnerable as she was. The thought of revenge, one she had never entertained before, began to grow in her mind. She went to sleep with a new resolve. She would no longer be the victim in this story. The sun was just peeking through the silk curtains when Maria began her daily chores at the Rosales mansion. Her movements were mechanical, her mind still replaying the previous night's events. While cleaning Mr. Rosales' study, a glimmer caught her eye. There, almost hidden among disorganized papers, was a lottery ticket. Maria took it with trembling hands, her heart racing. For a moment, she imagined a different life, free from oppression and humiliation. Without thinking twice, she tucked the ticket into her apron pocket. She had barely finished cleaning when she heard Mrs. Rosales' frantic screams. "Where is my ticket?" The house became a whirlwind of accusations and frantic searching. Maria, with her heart in her throat, denied knowing anything, feeling the weight of the paper in her pocket as if it were lead. Mrs. Rosales, her eyes bloodshot, began to interrogate each employee, and when Maria's turn came, the tension was palpable. The hands of Mrs. Rosales searched her body as Maria silently prayed. That night, alone in her room, Maria turned on the small TV and the announcer revealed the winning numbers. With disbelief, she saw they matched the stolen ticket, a fortune capable of changing lives now in her possession. Initial euphoria quickly gave way to a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. Guilt, fear, and hope intertwined in her chest. What would she do now? Return the ticket and resume her life of servitude, or seize this opportunity regardless of the consequences? Maria went to bed with the ticket under her pillow, her dreams filled with possible futures and nightmares of being discovered. Fate had dealt her a hand, but the moral price was still to be determined. The dawn found Maria with deep, dark circles and a divided heart. Using her day off, she visited her brother in the modest apartment they shared. Seeing him so fragile and small for his 18 years strengthened her resolve. "The doctor says there's a new treatment," he said, his eyes shining with hope, "but it's very expensive." Maria thought, not in 100 years could we afford it. Each word was a dagger to Maria. The ticket in her pocket felt like a ton of weight. It could change her brother's life, give him the chance he deserved, but was it worth sacrificing her integrity? Back at the Rosales mansion, the atmosphere was toxic. Mrs. Rosales, consumed by the loss of the ticket, had become even more cruel. Her shouts echoed through the halls, blaming everyone for her misfortune. Maria cleaned in silence, each insult feeding her determination. She watched as Mr. Rosales, once formidable, shrank under the weight of debts and his wife's anger. She heard him murmur about bankruptcy and ruin. In a moment of weakness, Maria almost confessed. The words were on the tip of her tongue when Mrs. Rosales slapped her, accusing her once again of theft. "You're a thief, an ingrate. You should be grateful we give you work." Something inside Maria broke. Compassion gave way to resolve. It was no longer just for her or her brother. It was for every humiliation, every injustice. That night, under the moonlight, Maria made her decision. She would no longer be the victim. The money was hers, and with it, the freedom she so desperately wanted. Whatever the consequences, she would face them with her head held high. Fate had given her this opportunity, and she would not let it slip away. For the first time in years, Maria fell asleep with a smile on her lips, dreaming of a bright future for herself and her brother. The unexpected arrival of Lucia, the Rosales' daughter, shook the already tense atmosphere of the mansion. Recently graduated from university abroad, Lucia brought a breath of fresh air and a perceptive gaze that quickly noticed the cracks in the family facade. She moved through the house, her eyes catching details others overlooked. The young heiress seemed different from her parents, displaying a kindness Maria wasn't used to receiving from the Rosales family. "Is everything okay?" Lucia asked one day, surprising Maria with her genuine concern. "I notice you're worried." Maria felt the words catch in her throat. For a moment she considered confessing everything, seeking relief in Lucia's apparent understanding. But the memory of past humiliations sealed her lips. Meanwhile, Mrs. Rosales, consumed by the loss of the ticket, made a drastic decision. Maria heard her on the phone, hiring a private investigator to find the lost ticket. Panic gripped Maria as she, with trembling hands, hid the ticket in a place she believed was safe, praying no one would find it. Every sound, every glance became a potential threat. At night, when the house slept, Maria would sneak away to plan her escape, researching how to claim the prize without raising suspicions, imagining a life away from the oppression of the Rosales. But guilt and fear gnawed at her. She saw the concern in Lucia's eyes, the growing desperation on Mr. Rosales' face, and felt the weight of her secret crushing her. Lucia argued with her parents. Words like debt, casino, and bankruptcy drifted into Maria's ears. She realized the ticket was not only her salvation, but could also be the Rosales' downfall. With her heart racing and mind conflicted, Maria wondered if she had gone too far to turn back. The prize promised freedom, but the moral cost grew with each passing day. Paranoia enveloped the Rosales' mansion like a thick, invisible fog. Maria felt invisible eyes following her every move. The private investigator, a grim-faced man, prowled the house, his presence a silent threat that made Maria's skin crawl. In a moment of weakness, Maria visited her brother in the hospital. Seeing him connected to machines, his small body struggling to grow, nearly broke her. Words crowded her throat, confession on the brink of escaping. But seeing the hope in her brother's eyes, Maria bit her tongue. The treatment was his only chance, and she had the means to provide it. Back at the mansion, tension reached its boiling point. Mrs. Rosales, with deep dark circles and trembling hands, gathered all the staff. Her normally authoritative voice quivered with a mix of desperation and fury. "I know one of you has my ticket," she declared, her eyes scanning the terrified faces. "If the culprit doesn't confess right now, I'll report all of you for theft." The ensuing silence was deafening. Maria felt her heart pounding so loudly she feared everyone could hear it. In a battered car speeding down back roads to avoid major routes, Maria, with her heart racing, kept glancing in the rearview mirror, fearing to see the lights of a pursuing vehicle. "I have a contact in the lottery," the investigator explained while driving. "He'll help us claim the prize without raising suspicion, but we need to hurry." Guilt gnawed at Maria as she thought of her brother and the promise of a better future, but she also recalled the humiliations and the cruel treatment from Mrs. Rosales. Each mile away from the mansion brought a mix of relief and regret. Meanwhile, Lucia watched the chaos at the mansion with a mix of horror and suspicion. She knew Maria well enough to understand she wasn't just a simple thief. Something more was going on, and she was determined to uncover it. "Dad," Lucia interrupted another frantic call from her father. "What's really happening? Why is this ticket so crucial?" Mr. Rosales looked at her, the weight of years of lies and secrets reflected in his tired eyes. He was about to confess everything when the phone rang. It was the police. Someone had seen Maria and the investigator together, and the news spread like wildfire. Unaware of this, Maria clung to the ticket as the car ate up miles. Her future, and that of many others, hung by an increasingly thin thread as she and the investigator approached their destination. The Rosales mansion had turned into an emotional battlefield. Driven by a mix of worry and curiosity, Lucia decided to confront her parents. "What did you do to Maria?" she demanded, her voice trembling with indignation. "She's not a thief. Something else is happening here, and I deserve to know the truth." The ensuing silence was deafening. Mrs. Rosales, normally unyielding, collapsed into a chair, sobbing uncontrollably. Mr. Rosales, with a sigh of defeat, began to reveal the truth: gambling debts, failed investments, and the desperation that led them to pin all their hopes on a lottery ticket. Lucia listened in horror as years of lies and facades crumbled before her eyes. Meanwhile, Maria and the investigator arrived at the lottery office. Maria's heart pounded as they entered the building. The investigator's contact, a nervously looking man, greeted them with a tense smile. "We need to act fast," he murmured. "They've started asking questions about this ticket." Just when it seemed everything was going according to plan, Maria noticed something odd about the contact's behavior. His eyes avoided hers, and his hands trembled slightly as he handled the ticket. A chill ran down Maria's spine. She was about to be betrayed again. At that moment, the office doors burst open. Mrs. Rosales, with red eyes and disheveled hair, stormed into the room, closely followed by the police. "There she is!" she yelled, pointing at Maria. "She stole my ticket!" Chaos erupted. Chaos erupted as Maria, paralyzed by fear, watched her dream of freedom fade before her eyes. The investigator, revealing his true nature, attempted to slip away amidst the confusion. In the midst of the commotion, Maria's gaze met Mrs. Rosales's. For a brief moment, she saw not just anger, but also desperation and realization. The realization hit her. Everyone was a victim of their own desperate choices. The commotion in the lottery office dissipated as quickly as it had begun. Maria, the investigator, and the Rosales family were taken to the local precinct for questioning. The tension was palpable in the small waiting room where everyone sat, avoiding eye contact. Maria, handcuffed and heartbroken, watched as her dream of a better life crumbled. The investigator, seated in a corner, whispered with his lawyer, casting furtive glances at her. Mrs. Rosales, stripped of her usual arrogance, appeared a shadow of her former self. Her smudged makeup revealed a vulnerable and frightened woman. Mr. Rosales, on the other hand, kept his head in his hands, visibly crushed by the weight of his decisions. Lucia arrived soon after, her eyes red from crying. She looked at Maria with a mix of disappointment and sympathy before sitting with her parents. The silence was broken by the arrival of a police officer. "The ticket," he announced, "is authentic and a winner." The news hit like a bomb. Mrs. Rosales jumped up, claiming her right to the prize. Maria, mustering all her courage, spoke for the first time since her arrest. "I found it," she said, her voice trembling but resolute. "It was lying in the study, forgotten among papers." The officer looked from one woman to the other, and then at the ticket. "This will have to be resolved in court," he declared. The revelation that the ticket was indeed a grand prize winner ignited a media frenzy. Journalists swarmed outside the precinct, eager to capture every detail of the story. Maria was released on bail, surprisingly paid by Lucia, As she exited the precinct, she faced a barrage of cameras and microphones. Questions rained down on her. Why did she do it? Did she regret it? What would she do with the money if she won the case? Overwhelmed, Maria could only murmur, "I just wanted a better life for my brother and me." As she moved away from the crowd, Maria realized her life would never be the same. The ticket that promised freedom had become a chain binding her to an uncertain and turbulent future. The final confrontation took place at the Rosales mansion, now the epicenter of a scandal-rocking society. Armed with the truth and backed by lawyers hired by Lucia, Maria faced the family that had belittled her for years. The grand ballroom, once the scene of opulent parties, was now an emotional battleground. Maria faced Mrs. Rosales with a mix of hatred and desperation. "You're a traitor after everything we've done for you." Mrs. Rosales' voice dripped with venom. Maria, surprisingly calm, responded, "What you did for me? Insults, humiliation, and treating me like a slave." Mr. Rosales, slumped in his favorite chair, seemed to age years in a matter of days. With a broken voice, he began to reveal the truth about their crumbling empire, the suffocating debts, and how the lottery ticket was their last hope. Lucia, standing between her parents and Maria, listened in horror as years of lies and appearances collapsed. "How could you?" she asked, tears streaming down her face. "How could you deceive us all? If this story interests you, I would be honored and grateful for your support. Simply subscribing would help me continue bringing you the best stories. Thank you in advance, and many blessings to you." Now, back to the story. The tension peaked when Maria's lawyer presented evidence of embezzlement and tax evasion by the Rosales family. Mr. Rosales, witnessing his world crumble, suffered a nervous breakdown and needed medical attention. Amid the chaos, Maria faced Mrs. Rosales. For a moment, she saw not only anger but also a glimmer of recognition, as if Mrs. Rosales was finally seeing Maria as a human being. "What do you really want?" Mrs. Rosales asked, her voice barely a whisper. Maria, her heart pounding, replied, "Justice and the chance for a dignified life, something you always denied me." The ensuing silence was deafening. Lucia, making a decision, approached Maria. "I think it's time we all face the truth," she said, looking at her parents, "and the consequences of our actions." As the lawyers negotiated a possible settlement, Maria realized that this bittersweet victory was just the beginning of a long and difficult path toward redemption and true justice. The days following the confrontation at the Rosales mansion were a whirlwind of legal and media activity. Maria, now in the public eye, navigated a completely new and frightening world. With part of the prize money frozen pending legal resolution, Maria hired a top-notch legal team. The young woman who once scrubbed floors now sat in luxurious offices, discussing legal strategies that would shape her future. Meanwhile, Mrs. Rosales, consumed by revenge, moved her own pieces on the board. In a desperate act, she tried to sabotage Maria's brother's medical treatment by bribing a nurse to tamper with his medication. When Maria discovered this, something broke inside her. The guilt and remorse she had felt evaporated, replaced by a fierce determination. "If they want war," murmured Maria to herself, "then war they shall have." Lucia, torn between family loyalty and her sense of justice, approached Maria in secret. "I can't believe what my mother has done," she confessed with tears in her eyes. "I want to help you, Maria. It's the right thing to do." With Lucia's assistance, Maria obtained crucial evidence of the Rosales family's illegal activities, documents, recordings, and witnesses. All this evidence began to build a strong case, not only for claiming the lottery prize, but also for exposing years of exploitation and fraud. The private investigator, seeing which way the wind was blowing, attempted to negotiate his silence in exchange for immunity. Maria, hardened by recent events, rejected his offer without hesitation. As the case progressed, Maria realized that the money she once believed would bring her freedom had become a heavy burden. Each decision, each legal move, pulled her further away from the person she once was. One night, while visiting her brother in the hospital, Maria looked at herself in the bathroom mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back. Determined, strong, yet with a hardness in her eyes she had never had before. She wondered if in her quest for justice she was losing an essential part of herself. The legal battle between Maria and the Rosales family became the talk of the nation. Media outlets, hungry for every juicy detail, turned each day into a new episode of a real-life soap opera. Advised by her lawyers, Maria decided to tell her story in an exclusive interview. With a trembling but resolute voice, she recounted years of abuse, humiliation, and grueling work. Her testimony moved the audience and split public opinion. Meanwhile, Mrs. Rosales didn't sit idly by. In a desperate attempt to salvage her reputation, she gave her own interview, portraying Maria as an ungrateful and manipulative employee. "We gave her a roof, food, and treated her like family," she declared with carefully rehearsed tears. Mr. Rosales, pressured by the scrutiny, began to reveal secrets in an attempt to save himself. Each new revelation was like an earthquake, shaking the foundations of high society. Unable to endure her parents' lies, Lucia decided to testify in Maria's favor. Her statement, confirming the inhumane treatment of employees and her family's illegal activities, was a devastating blow to the Rosales. As the case moved forward, Maria found that victory had a bitter taste. The money she had longed for didn't bring the peace she expected. The distrustful glances from her former co-workers, the whispers behind her back, and the constant judgment from strangers began to take their toll. One night, exhausted from another round of meetings with lawyers, Maria collapsed in her new, luxurious hotel room. Gazing out the window at the city that never slept, she wondered if she had truly gained anything. Her brother was better, yes, but at what cost? The phone rang, jolting her from her thoughts. It was her lawyer. "Maria," he said in a grave tone, "we have new information, something that could change the entire case." With her heart racing, Maria listened, realizing that her struggle was far from over. The real test of her character was just beginning. The new information her lawyer had uncovered was explosive, documents proving that Mr. Rosales had been involved in large-scale money laundering. This revelation not only bolstered Maria's case, but also threatened to completely destroy the Rosales family. Horrified by her father's actions, Lucia decided to take a more proactive stance. She approached Maria with a bold proposal to work together to expose the entire truth, regardless of the consequences for her own family. "It's the right thing to do," Lucia said, her eyes filled with determination. "We've lived a lie for too long." Touched by Lucia's integrity, Maria agreed to the alliance. Together, they began to unravel the complex web of lies and corruption surrounding the Rosales family. Meanwhile, the private investigator, sensing the tide turning, made one last desperate move. He approached Maria and Lucia with a blackmail offer, claiming he had information that could incriminate both sides and was willing to sell it to the highest bidder. Maria and Lucia faced a moral crossroads. They had to decide whether to pay to silence the investigator and protect their case, or to remain steadfast in their pursuit of truth, no matter the cost. Their decision led them to undertake increasingly questionable actions. Maria, once a victim, found herself treading a fine line between justice and revenge. One night, while reviewing documents in Lucia's apartment, Maria's brother's voice, filled with disappointment, came through the speaker. "Maria, what have you become? This wasn't the dream we had." His words hit Maria like a punch to the stomach, making her realize that in her quest for justice, she was losing sight of what truly mattered. Seeing the anguish in Maria's eyes, Lucia took her hand. "We still have time to do the right thing," she said softly, "but we need to be brave." Bearing the weight of their decisions, Maria and Lucia prepared for their next move, knowing each step brought them closer to a point of no return. The truth about the lottery ticket's origin exploded like a bomb in the media. An investigative journalist had uncovered that the winning ticket had been bought with money from a charity fund embezzled by the Rosales family. This revelation shook the foundations of the case and threatened to invalidate the prize. Maria and the Rosales family were forced into an uncomfortable truce, united by necessity. To protect the prize, now hanging by a thread, both legal teams worked frantically to find a solution that would prevent the total loss of the money. As the legal battle intensified, Maria's brother suffered a severe relapse. Doctors warned that without an expensive and immediate intervention, his condition could become irreversible. Maria found herself torn between fighting for the prize and the urgent need to help her brother. Amid this chaos, Lucia discovered documents implicating her father in an even greater corruption scheme. Tearful but resolute, Lucia approached Maria with the evidence. "This could ruin my family forever," Lucia said, her eyes brimming with tears. "But it's the right thing to do. We need to expose it." Exhausted both physically and emotionally, Maria faced the hardest decision of her life: use the information to secure the prize and save her brother, or reveal the truth and risk everything for justice. Suspecting something was amiss, Mr. Rosales approached Maria with a desperate offer: withdraw all accusations and forfeit the prize in exchange for her silence about the new findings. As Maria considered the offer, she received a call from the hospital. Her brother's condition had critically worsened. She needed to make a decision quickly. With time running out and pressure mounting from all sides, Maria realized that whatever choice she made would irrevocably alter many lives, including her own. The question was no longer just about money or justice, but about what kind of person she chose to be at this crucial moment. Irony, with its usual flair, intervened at the most critical juncture. As Maria wrestled with Mr. Rosales' offer and the urgency of her brother's condition, Mrs. Rosales suffered a devastating car accident. The news spread like wildfire. At the mansion, Mr. Rosales, pale and trembling, received a call from the hospital. His wife was in critical condition, fighting for her life at the same facility where Maria's brother was being treated. Upon learning of the accident, Maria felt a confusing mix of emotions. On one hand, years of mistreatment and humiliation weighed heavily on her heart. On the other, an unexpected sense of compassion emerged. Life, in all its fragility, presented itself to her in a way she had never before contemplated. Lucia, devastated by the news, approached Maria with pleading eyes. "I know I have no right to ask anything," she said through sobs, "but please help us. The prize money could save my mother." The moral dilemma reached epic proportions. Maria found herself in a position to decide the fate of the woman who had hurt her so deeply. The irony was not lost on her. She now held the power to be either cruel or compassionate. In the hospital, Maria walked through the corridors, her mind a whirlwind of emotions. In one room, her brother fought to survive. In another, Mrs. Rosales battled for her life. Two seemingly opposing lives were now united by the fragility of human existence. The medical team approached Maria, needing an immediate decision about her brother's treatment. At the same time, Mr. Rosales' lawyer called, urging her to respond to Mr. Rosales' offer. At this crucial moment, Maria realized that her choice would not only determine the fate of the money, but also define who she was as a person. Would she choose revenge or compassion, justice or mercy? With her heart racing and hands trembling, Maria prepared to make a decision that would alter the course of multiple lives, including her own. The weight of the world seemed to rest on her shoulders as she contemplated the true meaning of redemption and forgiveness. In an act that surprised everyone, including herself, Maria made an unexpected decision. With a firm but emotional voice, she announced that she would use part of the prize money to pay for both her brother's and Mrs. Rosales' treatments. "We can't control what happens to us," Maria said, looking at Lucia and Mr. Rosales, "but we can choose how we respond." The news of Maria's decision spread rapidly through the hospital and beyond. Overwhelmed by the unexpected compassion, Mr. Rosales collapsed into a chair, silent tears streaming down his aged face. Lucia hugged Maria, murmuring broken thanks. For a moment, class barriers and resentment melted away, leaving only two women united by adversity and hope. However, Maria's decision came with conditions. With the help of her lawyers, she drafted an agreement requiring a full confession from the Rosales family about their illegal activities and fair compensation for all exploited employees. Mr. Rosales, seeing a chance for redemption, accepted the terms. With a broken voice, he began to reveal years of fraud, tax evasion, and labor abuses. Each word seemed to lift a burden from his shoulders as Lucia listened, horrified but determined to face the truth. While doctors worked frantically to save Mrs. Rosales and improve her brother's condition, a subtle shift began to manifest in the dynamics among everyone involved. Revenge and resentment slowly gave way to a deeper understanding of human fragility and the possibility for change. Watching her decision trigger a series of unimaginable events, Maria realized that the real prize was not the money, but the chance to break the cycle of hatred and resentment. That night, as she kept vigil by her brother's bedside, Maria reflected on the unexpected turn her life had taken. The path to healing and justice would be long and arduous, but for the first time in a long while, she felt a glimmer of true hope. The days following Maria's agreement were a whirlwind of emotions and revelations. As Mrs. Rosales fought for her life in intensive care, Mr. Rosales, consumed by guilt and remorse, began to unravel the intricate web of lies and corruption he had woven over the years. In a hospital conference room temporarily converted into an impromptu command center, Maria, Lucia, and a team of lawyers listened intently to each confession from Mr. Rosales, each more shocking than the last. Bribes to officials, large-scale tax evasion, and even the horrifying truth about the source of the charity fund money. The lottery ticket, Mr. Rosales confessed, his voice broken, was bought with money meant for an orphanage. I thought I could return it multiplied and win. Lucia, horrified by her father's actions, struggled to reconcile the man she thought she knew with the one now revealed to her. Maria, on her part, felt a mix of vindication and sorrow. The justice she had longed for was arriving, but at an emotional cost she hadn't anticipated. Meanwhile, in another part of the hospital, Maria's brother showed signs of improvement thanks to the intensive treatment. Each small progress was a testament to the transformative power of the compassion Maria had shown. However, the situation was far from resolved. As Mr. Rosales' confessions came to light, new legal and ethical challenges emerged. The lottery prize, now tainted by its questionable origin, became the center of a moral and legal debate. Maria found herself in the eye of a media storm. Journalists camped outside the hospital, eager for every fragment of information, while activist groups demanded that the money be returned to the affected charities. Amid this chaos, Maria received an anonymous note suggesting that there were more secrets to uncover, secrets that could change everything once again. With her heart racing, Maria realized that her journey to truth and justice had only just begun, with each revelation bringing new moral dilemmas and tough decisions. The anonymity of the note did not last long. The private investigator, sensing he was losing control of the situation, decided to play his last card. He appeared at the hospital, his face a mask of desperation and cunning. "I have evidence," he whispered to Maria and Lucia, "that could either ruin everyone or save them, depending on what you decide." Maria and Lucia exchanged worried glances as the investigator showed them compromising photos of Mr. Rosales with high-ranking politicians and documents suggesting a corruption network extending far beyond their imagination. "What do you want?" Maria asked, her voice tense. "Immunity and a share of the prize," he replied. The investigators' unhesitating proposal thrust them into an even greater ethical dilemma. Revealing the full truth could bring justice to many, but it would also ruin lives and shake the foundations of society. Concealing it, however, would make them complicit in the crimes they had sworn to expose. As they debated their next move, Maria's brother, now more lucid thanks to the treatment, surprised her with his perspective. "Remember why this all started?" he said weakly. "It wasn't about money or revenge. It was about justice and a dignified life." His words struck a deep chord with Maria, reminding her of her core values. Lucia, for her part, wrestled with family loyalty and her own sense of justice. "If we reveal everything," she pondered, "not only will my father fall, but many others will too. Do we have the right to decide that?" The tension in the room was palpable as the investigator waited impatiently, aware that his future hung in the balance. Feeling the weight of the decision on her shoulders, Maria closed her eyes for a moment. When she opened them, a new resolve was evident in her gaze. "We can't play the role of judges," she said finally, "but neither can we be accomplices to a cover-up. We will turn over all the information to the proper authorities and let justice take its course." Her decision marked a point of no return. They knew the consequences would be enormous, but it was the only path to true redemption. Maria and Lucia's choice to hand over all the information triggered a social and political earthquake. Within hours, news of the widespread corruption leaked to the media, igniting an unprecedented scandal. Headlines screamed accusations of massive fraud, misappropriation of charitable funds, and a corruption network reaching the highest levels of government. The Rosales mansion, once a symbol of opulence and power, became the epicenter of a media storm. Maria found herself at the heart of a national ethical debate. For some, she was a heroine who exposed the elite's corruption. For others, an opportunist who betrayed her employers. Talk shows and social media buzzed with divided opinions about her role. Meanwhile, a group of beneficiaries affected by the embezzled charity fund arrived at the hospital. Humble families, children from an orphanage, elderly from a nursing home. Their stories of struggle and need put a human face on the consequences of the corruption. "We just want what's fair," said a single mother holding her sick child. "That money could have changed our lives." Deeply moved by these testimonies, Maria faced her toughest dilemma yet. Though legally hers, the lottery prize was tainted by its origin. Did she have the moral right to keep it, knowing the good it could do for those in real need? Seeing Maria's internal struggle, Lucia took her hand and said, "Anyone would." "Your decision," Lucia said softly. "I'll stand by you." At that moment, Maria had an epiphany. The money she once thought would bring her freedom and happiness had become an unbearable burden. Looking into the hopeful eyes of the beneficiaries and recalling her own struggles, she made a choice that would astonish everyone. With a firm yet emotional voice, Maria announced, "This money was never truly mine. It belongs to those who need it most. I will donate it all to the charity fund so it can be used as it was always intended." Her statement was met with stunned silence, followed by a wave of emotions. Maria knew this decision would alter the course of her life forever, but for the first time in a long while, she felt she was doing the right thing, regardless of the consequences. News of Maria's choice to donate the entire prize money spread like wildfire. The media, which had been fueling the scandal for days, now had a new angle. The former maid turned millionaire. As the public absorbed this surprising twist, Mrs. Rosales woke from her coma. Her first weak but clear words were, "What has happened?" Mrs. Rosales' awakening brought a new wave of complications. The doctors reported she was suffering from selective amnesia, erasing her memory of the lottery ticket and recent events. This new situation created an ethical dilemma for all involved. Maria, accompanied by Lucia, entered the hospital room to confront the woman who had tormented her for so long. "Mrs. Rosales, pale and vulnerable in her hospital bed, barely resembled the imposing figure Maria remembered. "Maria, dear, what are you doing here? Has something happened at home?" Mrs. Rosales asked, her voice filled with a kindness Maria had never heard before. Maria's heart raced. She had the chance to rewrite the story and present a version that would favor her. For a moment, the temptation of revenge resurfaced within her. Lucia, sensing Maria's internal conflict, gently squeezed her hand in support. Maria took a deep breath and, looking directly into Mrs. Rosales' eyes, began to tell the truth. She spoke of the ticket, the humiliations, the revelations of corruption, and her final decision to donate the money. As Maria spoke, Mrs. Rosales' face went through a range of emotions: confusion, disbelief, shame, and finally, deep sadness. "I don't remember any of that," Mrs. Rosales said in a broken voice. "But if it's true, I've been a monster. How could I?" At that moment, Mr. Rosales entered the room. Seeing his wife awake and crying, he realized it was time to face the consequences of his actions. "It's time for all of us to take responsibility for our actions," he said, with a voice full of regret. With a firm yet weary demeanor, Maria observed the Rosales family and realized she was witnessing the beginning of a profound transformation. Mrs. Rosales' amnesia, far from being a hindrance, had become an opportunity for a fresh start, not only for the Rosales family, but for everyone involved. The awakening of Mrs. Rosales and Maria's confession triggered a series of unforeseen events. Mrs. Rosales' memory loss, rather than a curse, turned into a strange blessing, offering a unique chance for redemption and change. Driven by a blend of compassion and a desire to close this chapter of her life, Maria decided to reveal the entire truth to Mrs. Rosales. With Lucia at her side as a silent supporter, Maria recounted the full story from past grievances to recent developments. Mrs. Rosales' reaction was heartbreaking. As Maria spoke, silent tears streamed down the face of the woman who had once tormented her. "I can't remember being that person," Mrs. Rosales sobbed, "but I feel the truth in your words, Maria. How could I have been so cruel?" This moment of vulnerability created an unexpected bond between the two women. Maria, who had come ready to confront her former oppressor, found herself offering comfort to a woman burdened by actions she couldn't recall. Meanwhile, Mr. Rosales, seeing an opportunity for redemption, made a drastic decision. "I'm going to confess everything," he announced, his voice trembling but resolute. "Every shady deal, every bribe, every lie. It's time to clear our name, even if it means losing everything." Moved by her father's honesty and her mother's transformation, Lucia approached them. "You're not alone in this," she said, taking her parents' hands. "We will face the consequences together as a family." Maria watched this scene with a mix of astonishment and confusion. The family that had once embodied everything she hated was now displaying a humanity she could not ignore. She realized that true vengeance was not in destroying them, but in witnessing their transformation. That night, as Maria prepared to leave the hospital, Mrs. Rosales called her to her room. "Maria," she said softly, "I know I can't change the past, but do you think we could—" Looking into the eyes of the woman who had hurt her so much, Maria saw something she had never seen before: genuine remorse and hope. With her heart racing, Maria nodded slowly, taking the first step on a path of forgiveness she had never believed possible. Dawn found the Rosales family and Maria in a situation none of them would have imagined days earlier. Gathered in the hospital room, they faced together the consequences of years of secrets and lies. Lucia, determined to uncover every detail, confronted her father about the last elements of his shady dealings. With the burden of a lifetime of deceit weighing heavily on him, Mr. Rosales began to unravel the complex web of corruption he had woven over the years. Each confession struck Lucia like a dagger as she watched her father's image crumble before her eyes. "I'm sorry, my daughter," Mr. Rosales said, tears streaming down his weathered face. "I thought I was doing it for our family, but I was only destroying us." Maria, a silent observer of this family revelation, found herself unexpectedly moved. The empire she had once envied and resented was now revealed as a hollow facade built on lies and suffering. Amidst the confessions, the private investigator reappeared with new information that could partially exonerate Maria, but would definitively implicate the Rosales family. "I have evidence," he said in a conspiratorial whisper, "that the ticket was purchased with clean money, but I also have proof of even greater frauds by the Rosales family." This revelation placed Maria at a moral crossroads. She could use this information to fully clear her name, but it would come at the cost of destroying any chance of redemption for the Rosales family. Lucia, seeing the conflict in Maria's eyes, took her hand. "Whatever you decide," she said softly, "I'll support you. You've shown more integrity than any of us." Maria, looking into Lucia's eyes, then at Mr. Rosales, and finally at Mrs. Rosales, who watched the scene with a mix of confusion and remorse, made a decision that would astonish everyone. "No more secrets," Maria declared firmly. "We'll face the truth, every bit of it, together no matter the cost." Her decision marked a turning point. The Rosales family, Maria and Lucia, realized they were now bound not by ties of blood or money, but by a shared pursuit of redemption and truth. The next morning, headlines across newspapers and news channels screamed with the news. "Rosales scandal, domestic worker exposes corruption network." Maria's choice to reveal the full truth had unleashed an unprecedented media storm. She found herself at the center of a whirlwind, with journalists camped outside the hospital, eager to capture every detail of the story. Social media buzzed with debates on ethics, justice, and redemption. Amid the chaos, Maria's now recovered brother visited her at the hospital. His presence was a powerful reminder of why she had started this journey. "I'm proud of you, sister," he said, hugging her tightly. "But are you sure this is what you want? The path you've chosen won't be easy." Maria, moved by her brother's support, felt her resolve strengthen. "It's the right thing to do," she replied. "I can't build a new life on lies and secrets." Meanwhile, Lucia was organizing a press conference, determined to confront the situation head-on. As Lucia prepared to make a public statement on behalf of her family, Maria received an anonymous call just moments before the press conference was set to begin. The voice on the other end was grave and menacing. "If you speak out, there will be consequences. Some secrets are better left buried." Maria's heart raced. The threat was clear, but so was her resolve. With trembling hands, she shared the call with Lucia. "Should we cancel the press conference?" Lucia suggested, her concern evident. "Your safety comes first." Maria looked at Lucia and then at the anxious Rosales family waiting in the hospital room. She thought about her brother, the beneficiaries of the charity fund, and all the lives impacted by this web of lies. "No," she said finally, her voice firm despite her fear. "We've come too far to turn back now. The truth must come out, no matter the consequences." With this decision, Maria and Lucia braced themselves to face the media and the world. They knew their words would change lives, shake institutions, and potentially put them in danger, but they also understood it was the only path to true redemption. As they walked toward the press room, Maria felt the weight of responsibility on her shoulders. This was her chance to give a voice to those silenced by power and corruption. With each step, she reaffirmed her decision to confront whatever came next, regardless of the personal cost. The press conference was explosive, shaking the very foundations of society. Maria and Lucia, side by side, revealed the truth without reservations. They spoke of the corruption, the lottery ticket, and how a simple act of desperation had uncovered a web of deceit far beyond the Rosales family. As Maria detailed years of abuse and exploitation, Lucia exposed her father's shady dealings and the complicity of powerful figures. The press room was silent, except for the clicking of cameras and the occasional gasp of surprise from journalists. But the real bombshell came when Maria disclosed that the charity fund's money had originated from illegal activities tied to a cartel. This revelation sent shockwaves through the media and alerted the authorities. Within hours, the Rosales mansion was raided by police, and Mr. Rosales, still in the hospital, was placed under custody. The investigation quickly broadened to involve politicians, business people, and even judges. Maria and the Rosales family found themselves in the eye of the storm, facing real and tangible threats to their lives. They had to be placed under police protection, their lives forever altered. Amidst the chaos, Maria had an epiphany. Seeing Lucia remain strong despite the crumbling world around her, and thinking of her brother, whose life had been saved by this turn of events, Maria understood the true value of life and family. It all started with an act of desperation and vengeance, but now I see it's about something much bigger than us, Maria said calmly. Lucia nodded, taking Maria's hand. It's about doing what's right, regardless of the cost, she responded. With this realization, Maria made a decision that would astonish everyone. She called a meeting with the Rosales family, her brother, their lawyers, and representatives of the charity fund's beneficiaries. She had a plan that could offer redemption for all, but would require significant sacrifices. As she prepared to present her idea, Maria knew she was about to alter not just her life, but the lives of many others. The path to true justice and redemption was just beginning, and she was determined to see it through to the end, no matter the obstacles. The hospital conference room became the stage for an unprecedented meeting. Maria, with a resolve that surprised everyone, addressed the diverse and tense group. "What I'm about to propose," she began, her voice firm but emotional, "may seem radical, even impossible, but I believe it's our only chance to make things right." Maria laid out her plan: to create a foundation with all the lottery money and recovered assets from the Rosales' illegal activities. This foundation would be jointly run by her, the Rosales family, and representatives of the original charity fund beneficiaries. "But this isn't just about the money," she continued. "I propose that we all publicly confess our mistakes, accept the legal consequences, and dedicate our lives to repairing the harm we've caused." A stunned silence followed her words. The lawyers exchanged incredulous glances, while the victims' representatives murmured among themselves. Mr. Rosales, pale but resolute, was the first to speak. "I have lived a life of lies and greed," he said. "I am willing to face the consequences and do whatever it takes to make amends." Lucia, with tears in her eyes but her head held high, supported the proposal. "I will use my education and privilege to ensure this foundation truly makes a difference," she promised. Mrs. Rosales, still grappling with her amnesia but moved by the plan's nobility, nodded silently, squeezing her husband's hand. The victims' representatives, though skeptical, saw this proposal as a unique opportunity for real justice and restitution. Maria's brother, fully recovered, offered his unique perspective as a beneficiary. "This plan will not only change our lives, but those of future generations," he declared with conviction. As the discussion progressed, the tension in the room was palpable. Each person present wrestled with their own inner demons, weighing the desire for self-preservation against the possibility of genuine redemption. Maria observed the reactions, knowing that she was asking everyone to confront their deepest fears and make sacrifices for a chance at real change. Sacrifices, but also knew that this was the only path to genuine and lasting justice. As the debate continued, one thing was clear: regardless of the outcome, nothing would ever be the same. The decision made in that room would impact not only their own lives, but also ripple through society. The silence following Maria's proposal was broken by the sound of the door opening. An imposing man in a suit entered, his presence commanding attention. It was the Attorney General, drawn by the scale of the case. "I have heard your proposal, Miss Maria," he said with a grave voice. "It's admirable, but the law must take its course." The tension in the room heightened, but Maria remained unflinching. With a calmness that surprised even herself, she addressed the attorney. "Sir," she said, "I understand the need for justice, but isn't true justice about repairing harm and preventing future crimes? Our proposal does precisely that." The Attorney General scrutinized her words, then nodded slowly. "Proceed," he said with renewed energy. The group worked for hours, fine-tuning the details of the plan. Mrs. Rosales, moved by Maria's compassion, was the first to sign the agreement. "I want to become the person I should be," she said with tears in her eyes. Mr. Rosales followed her lead, agreeing to face reduced charges in exchange for his full cooperation. Lucia pledged to use her skills to ensure the foundation's transparency. One by one, the victims' representatives and the lawyers joined the agreement. Maria's brother offered to be the public face of the foundation, a living testament to its positive impact. When the final document was signed, a sense of collective achievement filled the room. Maria looked around at the tired but hopeful faces and felt a weight lift from her shoulders. "This is just the beginning," she said softly. "The road to redemption will be long and challenging, but we will walk it together." The Attorney General, impressed by the group's resolve, offered his support to implement the plan within the legal framework. As the sun set, bathing the room in golden light, Maria reflected on the incredible journey that began with a simple lottery ticket. She had sought vengeance and found redemption, not only for herself, but for everyone involved. Sometimes, Maria thought, looking at the Rosales family, her brother and Lucia, true wealth isn't in money but in the chance to do what's right, no matter how difficult. With this realization, the group dispersed, each carrying the responsibility of a new beginning and the promise of a better future, not just for themselves, but for all those whose lives they would touch through their work with the foundation. The story of Maria, the Rosales family, and the lottery ticket would become a symbol of transformation and hope, reminding everyone that even in the darkest moments, there is a path to redemption. Curiosity is where true redemption and change lie. I invite you to share your thoughts and impressions in the comments section. I would be deeply honored if you could leave a like. Also, be sure to check out the next story. It's truly remarkable. Blessings.